Assalamu alaikum and welcome to this weekend's edition of Book Bites. We've got some fantastic lineup in the literary industry with the Time of the Writer Festival coming up. I also have a debut South African author online today. We'll be chatting to Jarred Thompson today about his latest, or rather his debut novel, The Institute for Creative Dying. Brings up a lot of questions. It's a very interestingly written book, completely outside the box, but it brings up questions that I think, have occurred in many ways. And fiction is such a fantastic way to interrogate these sort of outside the box ideas. Jarred Thompson is a literary and cultural studies researcher and educator and works as a lecturer in the English department at the University of Pretoria. He was the winner of the 2020 Afritondo Prize and has been recipient of several prestigious scholarships, including the Global Excellence in Stature Scholarship, the Chris Van Wyk Creative Writing Scholarship, two National Arts Council grants, and an NRF NGAP Scholarship. The Institute for Creative Dying is his debut novel, a fantastic debut, a very a maze of a debut, and something that will really sort of get the creative juices flowing. Jared, welcome to the show. It's so wonderful to have an opportunity to chat to you this evening.
Thank you for having me, Shafinaaz. It's lovely to be with you and to speak about my work with you as well.
So newly launched, what does it feel like to finally have this baby out in the open?
It's been a whirlwind. I still have moments where I just have to stop myself and look back and like, wow, okay, it happened. I did it. I think it's been something that I've been working towards since high school. I've always known I want to be a writer since then, and I've started like with poetry and short stories. This being my first real major work, and it just feels like all of my writing was leading up to the publication of this, so it feels like a breaking through of something, a change, and a breaking through um, that has opened the world in many different ways for me.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, obviously, okay, so you lecture in English creative writing and literature, and so this is a career path for you, but at the same time, you've got this significant start to your body of work in the form of this publication. So I can pick your brain a bit, especially from that perspective, because I notice how you y- you take different points of views through your character. You allow us to see the characters from a distance, but you also allow us to dive into inside their heads. I found it very fascinating. So, talk to us about your actual writing process and what was going through your mind before we get to the themes in terms of creating these characters.
So starting out, I didn't know that this was the structure I wanted to take. I knew that I wanted to speak from different character perspectives. But then, while working on the story and taking note of where my interests lie in terms of in the natural world and in terms of the kind of poetic philosophy that I wanted to write in to the narrative, it there were moments where it felt contrived if a character was saying certain things. And so in my workshops, because I workshop the novel a lot, it was suggested to me, try a third person narrator, another voice that's distant from it and see what it does. And when I tried that, it really opened up the narrative for me. It allowed me the freedom to move and like juxtapose the natural and technological world with the dramas of my characters. So that freedom sort of coupled with being immersed in a character's worldview, in the way they speak, in the way they see the world, that was really productive for me. So going between those two things was really productive for me. And it was something that just came out of the writing process, out of sharing my work with other writers and getting feedback and suggestions on what might work, I should maybe try and experiment with. And it was a really fruitful experiment for me.
Well, it shows, the effort shows in the outcome because, writers are sometimes criticized for characters being a caricature of each other almost, because these voices start to bounce against each other in your head.
Hmm.
And so, and to separate these, there are some characters who do seem a little subdued, but it's their personality that comes through. There's a character like Tobias. I think Tobias is my favorite character for numerous reasons. The real rawness of the character, and it helps to actually have that view inside his head, to know what he's thinking, the language he uses, the flavors of his personality that comes through. Creating these characters, you spoke about the workshop, but your intentions to use them as vehicles to carry your story. Talk to us something about, how you delved into these characters.
In prepping for each character, I literally had sort of poster boards, and at the top of the head would be Tobias, and I would ask myself different questions. So like, what is Tobias as this character? What is his metaphysical picture of the world? How does he see the world? If you're Tobias, and a lot of it. In delving into the characters, it felt like method acting because I also had to research, okay, what is the kind of slang? I mean, yes, I know some from my own experience growing up in the colored community, but I also had to explore, okay, what other sort of slang might I not be accustomed with, and how might I be able to use it in terms of both what the slang means, but how could I take some poetic license and mix it up with the way, for example, the way he sees his liver cirrhosis, how might he say that? How might he verbalize that actual medical term in his sort of um, lived experience? So with each character, it was asking myself, how do they see the world, and what is them what obstacle, the major obstacle that they're facing in life that's preventing them from transforming their world. So for Angelique, for example, who is sort of gets validation from social media, right? And she sort of lives in this hyper mediated space where everything must be documented. How might that, yes, there's moments where that affirms life and there's a certain aesthetic to that. But how might that attachment also impede the character and what the character might see in their life as it is right now, and how might it block different pathways to transformation for these characters. So for each, it was about what obstacle are they facing, and how how is the attachment to that obstacle um, different for each of them, and how do they go about loosening that attachment. And I think the institute is that space where they're challenged to loosen their attachment to to anchors of identity, anchors that they think um, sustains their identity, that they build their whole world around. But what happens to these characters when those anchors get pulled from them? What resources do they draw from? And I think the institute as a place is something that's trying to just give them resources for transformation. Yeah.
We talk about this theme of, reflecting on the end of life, being given some finite state. I mean, technically, we all should be thinking that, you have this finite number of years to work with in your life. But here's this terminal illness, for example, that tells you this is it. These are your end days, or there's some finality. Um, what are the limits of reason within this finality? Because I mean, in so many ways, your story does bring this out through different characters. What are the limits of reason, and how are we liberated enough to to allow this reflection, this end of life reflection, this what have I done, where am I going, what's left to do?
Hmm. I think, so while I was writing this, there was obviously the COVID pandemic, and I did get COVID, and there was moments while I was ill where all I could do was just sit, right, and watch the world. I had very low energy levels. That's all I could do. And time, when you're sick, well, this is what at least one of my observations. When you're sick like that, time takes on a different dimension. You're a watcher of the world pass, and that was also an interesting aspect to me in that when you are ill, and we see it in other film and story adaptations where characters experience illness and they suddenly get this jolt of life, and the way they experience life is like, oh, it's like everything's amplified. But then the other instance, when for example, for characters like Diane, where she's so physically sort of innovated, like the energy drained from her, all she can do is watch and take notice of the fluctuations in the world around her and the fluctuations in herself. So I was interested in the way that sickness slows us down to that minutia of reality, and that the minutia of our own inner worlds, because a lot of the characters, yes, they're interacting with each other, but there's also a lot of memory that comes up when they're at the institute. It's like this, the institute is like this bubble where they're looking back at their lives, and all these memories are coming up. And I think being ill, whether chronically or terminally ill, changes that experience of the past for us. And we kind of look back and try to find resources that might shape a meaning for us, in whatever we reach for, whether that's religion or art, or our connections to other people. Um, so I think reason breaks down because yes, you can sort of rationalize, oh, I've been told, that maybe there's a place for me. I've had all my ducks in the row. I've been the good religious person, or I've been a good ethical person. But when you're faced with that fear, um, you never know how you might react. You never know where it might push you. So there's a certain, like you say, limit of reason that I think the institute plays with, because that's where I also got interested in limit experiences, and whether it's in chanting meditation or taking psychedelic mushrooms or um, doing holotropic breath work, all these experiences that science or research has shown us that is very similar to near-death experiences, because there's the sense of oceanic feeling, the sense of the boundary between the self and your environment dissolving. And I was interested in those experiences that have been documented, that different sort of indigenous religions around the world, from the Sand People to shamans in South America, have played with and have integrated into their own spiritual beliefs in the world. And what might those experiences tell us about our bodily relation to the outside world? Not just the mind, not just the models that our mind can impose on the world and abstract the world in different ways, but what is the body's relation? What happens when we we dissolve those boundaries, and we use these different techniques to dissolve those boundaries between the self and the other, or the self and the environment.
Well, it starts to make death not seem that final, because now you're breaking beyond this boundary of fear to feel that this end is fearsome, or that terminal illness is something to be feared. Um, I also found through the book, earlier you just mentioned while you were talking, I was thinking about how we talk about how your life flashes before your eyes when you're brought close, to a near-death experience, so to speak. But in this case, it's sort of like slow form. You have the time to stretch it out, to wonder if, firstly, that your life was memorable, that you can have something that you will be remembered by. We all want a witness to our lives, to understand that we did exist, we were there, we were something tangible once upon a time. And so those kind of reflections will come through. Once again, I keep coming back to Tobias because when I read through, all of the characters have something to bring to the story. But there's this authenticity about Tobias, and I don't know many characters, who might fit that. But Tobias was very sort of so, how did I mention it? Um, let's talk about the world to survive, right? There's an experience. I mean, not to get too much, not to give too much away, but there's an experience that the residents at the institute experience where the world to survive is brought out. These are men and women who are experiencing this end of life experience. They're given this burden to sacrifice and to be able to, but they experience a situation like Berkeley where their world to survive is very strongly brought out. The world to
Hmm.
protect our is brought out. And I found that an amazing juxtaposition when you're reading so many reflections about what's left, time that's left, finality, the sort of this bubble that they're in. about the juxtaposition, and, what that means to you as a creator. Or,
Yeah, so when it came to that um, that scene and sort of having the threat of your life taken away, I think it was also about speaking to um, the sense of biologically we are coded to survive, and we have this desperate need to survive. So even when we are being told sort of by the magician and Mustafa to let go, to be okay with death and dying, there's still boundaries that we need to have. Um, there's still this biological impulse to continue. And I think having writing that scene was sort of asking, yes, we have these different techniques and different ways to think about how to let go of the self, but there's still moments where the self or the ego or your will to survive is important. It's writing that scene was also a way to think through the relevance of boundaries, right? Yes, it's good, to open our door to people, to let our guard down, and like the different techniques to dissolve the ego, you could say, or the self. But then there's other moments where your self is threatened and you do need to react. So I wanted to just juxtapose that more, the philosophical meanderings of how you might approach mortality, but then also the more pragmatic on the ground experience of, well, what happens when your life is threatened and you are someone who lives these kind of philosophies. How would you react, and there's still a sense that you need your sense of self still, you need your boundaries, and the trick is, well, life is always, I guess, negotiating those boundaries. I mean, and for that violent scene, it was sort of asking the characters, okay, well, this is happening. How are you going to defend yourself, or are you going to just let things be? And I think, especially in the time that we live in, where we live in such a politicized space, negotiating boundaries and knowing who to let in and what to build barriers against. I think that was also in my mind. I'm thinking about the politics of what the mortician and Mustafa are trying to get their residents to do. So it's more about having the worldly realities impose on this sort of very mystical and esoteric space, and how might this space then react when they're put in danger like that, in a very worldly kind of danger.
the sort of title of the mortician. I mean, the name just sort of comes out in the story later on, but it's sort of like an important role that she's assumed. And yet, as much as there's that power in her role, as it's perceived to be, there's agency in the residents, of whether to decide, whether they're happy with her interceptions, whether they're happy with what she's offering and that sort of thing. That was also very interesting for me because it comes through in the reflections. Again, often in writers' workshops, we've heard of, and I speak about these things also because some of the audience wants to know, how do you write these characters and that sort of thing. We often talk of head hopping, right? And I think you've done very well, um, presentation of your characters where you allow this first person narrative and this third person narrative to flow. And it's not an easy task. I mean, I don't think there's anything to be said about a debut piece being an amateur piece before, because you've managed to do this very smoothly. You transition between allowing a space where you can view the character or actually be inside the character's head. Speak to us, especially for younger writers who are looking to overcome this head hopping, about that interplay between viewing and experiencing the character.
I
Maybe
think.
you can tell us
Uh,
these at the same time as well. I'll
Sorry,
put you
say
on the
that again.
spot. I say, well, I'll put you on the spot and ask you also to maybe reveal your favorite character through the book as well.
Okay. um, I think It does come down in terms of the head hopping. It does come down to taking time away from the page and being able to see and hear the character in your head. Okay, yes, that sounds a bit abstract, but what does that mean? So it means if you're writing about a model, submerge yourself in the world that models live, in the way in the interviews that they. You can look at all kinds of models, and that's the joy also of having the internet at your disposal. Literally, so many different types of people are accessible through their interviews, through the way they socialize, or what they post. So immerse yourself in the world of that character using, I would say, using the internet, using YouTube, using whatever is at your disposal, and take note of the language. How are they framing things? How do they see the world? Um, what sort of people do they surround themselves with? And once you're able to draw from them the kind of language, the kind of worldview, then you're on your way to understanding your character. What I would do for myself is I would literally keep a vocabulary list for each character. So the characters for me that were especially challenging are Angelique and Tobias, because I wanted them to have a texture to their language that was different to the others. The others, I felt like I could write without developing a distinct vocabulary because I've known of people like that in my life, so I could draw from my own lived experience. But for Angelique and Tobias, I literally kept a vocab list of just words that they might use, and slowly grew that list over time. So that's one technique you can use: watching interviews of those kind of people, videos, YouTube, even movies of those kind of people. But my one caveat with that would be just be careful of, like you say, caricature. So be, yes, use and pepper their dialogue and their language with how they might say things, but always be wary in the back of your mind, where am I taking away this character's humanity and making them more like a caricature? There's always that give and take, I think, in really submersing yourself in the language of a character. And then in terms of my favorite characters, or my favorite character, I do have a soft spot for Mustafa. I would say I have a soft spot for Mustafa. I think his idealism is admirable to me, even when he's threatened, and he's this kind of loyal to this institution that he's made. He's given up a lot for it, and he's also loyal to his friendship. And I think in terms of Mustafa and the mortician's relationship, I was also working out the dynamics of friendship. So, how is a friendship tested when a friendship embarks on whether it's a business idea or a certain kind of enterprise, and what tensions might arise in a friendship like that? And I think it's also one of the reasons why the narrative ends with Mustafa, because I wanted to return to, okay, what is a person like him now that he's given up everything and he's given up this very last thing that was his be all and end all? Where does he go to now? So I do have a soft spot um, for Mustafa. And it's interesting looking back over developing the characters. I still have moments where, like, I'll be driving in the car and it's gotten to a point where I can literally imagine the characters like sitting in the car with me. And I may not know exactly what they look like, but I just have the sense of, like, I don't know, their dispositions, the assemblage of who they have congealed to be in my head, and I can just imagine them, and it's a real joy to having been traveling with these characters and really working on them and have posters and vocab lists for them, and then to leave them aside and have them go out into the world and then still be able to return to them as these ideas in your head, um, that you always kind of return to, and that sometimes you see refracted in other people in the world. So yeah.
That's fantastic. And this is why I love listening to writers speak about the process and the development of characters, because at some point it's just, getting into the minds of your characters and carrying those characters along with you through your everyday when you're away from the manuscript. It was a fantastic, opportunity to really like pick your brain on this and to get through it. I know that you're currently launching. The book is available around the country, and that you'll be having launches around. We do wish you everything of the best. What do you anticipate over the next few weeks and months for this novel, and are you writing anything new?
Anticipating for this novel, I just I yeah, I would like it to start conversation, be passed around at in book clubs. Um, I don't want to sort of get ahead of myself and like wish that it does this or gets that. I think especially in the year that I turned 30, and I was saying this to a friend over the weekend, like this is my 30th gift to myself, like putting this work out into the world. So I want to cherish it for the lessons that it's taught me, and I hope that in the way I've put it out, in the structure, in the different worlds that I've tried to bring together, I hope that it sparks curiosity and maybe shows people different different sites where they might get some sort of comfort or some sort of interest in a different world view, because that's what literature did for me. So I can only hope that my own literature can do that for other people. Um, yeah, and in terms of writing, I'm currently working on my PhD in literary studies, and it is about happiness. It is about good feeling in present day South Africa and how it's represented in literature, reality TV, as well as in film, recent film, South African film. So working on that, and hopefully in a year or two, that dissertation will be out. But I will still try to write creatively. I do have an idea or want to for the next creative project to be a collection of short stories. But yeah, that's in the pipeline.
Jared, this is fantastic. We do wish you everything of the best with your writing journey, and especially with the launch of this novel. And wonderful to have had you on the show. We wish you all the best from us at
Thank you so
BookBytes.
much. Thank you so much, Shafinaaz. It's really been a great conversation.
And so there you have it. We heard from Jarred Thompson about the Institute for Creative Dying. That's it for this weekend on BookBytes. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.